The Duke of Kesteven told Eliza Sinclair, in front of half the drawing room, that there was nothing whatsoever special about her. A single careless sentence meant to kill a rumor before it could cost him a political alliance worth a great deal more, in his own careful reckoning, than the feelings of an apothecary's daughter. He would spend the following year proving, through a considerable list of laws and rules he had once believed himself far too disciplined to ever break, precisely how wrong that sentence had been. Before we get into how it started, this is a brand new channel, and if you love watching a proud, careful man discover that some mistakes require breaking every rule he ever lived by to properly undo, hit subscribe now so you don't miss how far he goes. Now, here's how it began. Damien Ashcroft, Duke of Kesteven, had been raised from birth to understand his own life as a series of careful obligations owed to family, title, and political consequence, and had spent his entire adult existence honoring those obligations with a discipline that left little genuine room for anything so impractical as his own private wishes. His late father had spent decades building a political alliance with Lord Pembroke, a formidable and ruthless figure whose influence in Parliament made him one of the most powerful men in England, an alliance intended to culminate, since the two men's respective children were still in the schoolroom, in the eventual marriage of Damien to Lord Pembroke's own daughter, Lady Victoria, a union that would consolidate the two families' considerable combined influence into something neither could achieve alone. Damien had grown up understanding this eventual marriage, not as a matter of personal choice, but as a settled fact of his existence, as fixed and unquestionable as his own name, and had approached his engagement to Lady Victoria, formalized in his 26th year, with the same dutiful, unemotional discipline he brought to every other obligation of his rank. It was Eliza Sinclair, the clever, sharp-witted daughter of the apothecary, who supplied Kesteven House's own considerable medical needs, whom Damien encountered entirely by accident during a delivery gone awry, when a shipment of his own ailing mother's medicine arrived with the wrong dosage marked upon its label, and Eliza herself, managing her father's shop during his own illness, called upon Kesteven House personally to correct the dangerous error before any harm could come of it. She arrived at the servants' entrance rather than the front hall, as propriety dictated for a tradesman's daughter, and it was only Damien's own chance presence in the corridor beyond, drawn by the sound of an unusually firm, insistent voice, explaining to a footman precisely why the matter could not wait for a more convenient hour, that brought the two of them face to face at all. Damien, present in the front hall when she arrived, found himself unexpectedly charmed by her plain, unhurried competence, her refusal to be intimidated by the grandeur of his household, and the particular, dry humor with which she explained the apothecary's mistake, without once resorting to the anxious, deferential apologies he generally received from tradespeople correcting their own errors. "Your mother's previous prescription was labelled correctly, Your Grace," Eliza informed him, laying out the 2 bottles for his own inspection with a brisk, practical directness. "But my father's new apprentice appears to believe that a dose sufficient for a grown man's chest complaint might also suit a woman of considerably smaller frame, recovering from a fever. I have brought the corrected dosage myself, rather than trust the matter to a second attempt by the same hand." "You inspire rather more confidence in a single sentence, Miss Sinclair," Damien observed, "than most physicians of my acquaintance manage across a full consultation." "Physicians are paid to sound confident, regardless of whether they possess any particular reason to be," Eliza said. "Apothecaries are paid to actually get the dosage right, which I find considerably better motivates genuine care in the matter." Their acquaintance grew, over the following months, through a series of entirely ordinary encounters that Damien found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, arranging with increasing and rather transparent frequency. Additional medical consultations for his mother that required rather more of Eliza's personal attention than any genuine necessity strictly demanded. Chance meetings at the modest circulating library Eliza's own family patronized, that Damien began visiting himself with a regularity his own staff found genuinely puzzling in a duke of his usual habits. He found in her conversation a directness and genuine substance he had never once encountered in the careful, calculated exchanges of his own social circle. And Eliza, for her own part, found herself drawn to a man considerably warmer and more genuinely curious about the world beyond his own rank than his formidable reputation had led her to expect. The growing acquaintance did not escape the notice of London's considerable gossip network for long, and it was Lady Victoria's own mother who first brought word of the whispered rumours to Lord Pembroke's attention, rumours considerably exaggerated beyond the actual, still entirely proper nature of Damien and Eliza's acquaintance, but damaging enough, in the delicate political calculus surrounding the upcoming marriage, that Lord Pembroke called upon Damien directly to demand an explanation, arriving at Kesteven House with the same cold, formidable authority he brought to every negotiation of consequence. "I have heard troubling reports, Your Grace," Lord Pembroke said, "regarding your rather frequent attention toward an apothecary's daughter. I trust you understand precisely what such rumours, left uncorrected, might do to an alliance 20 years in the careful making." Damien, caught genuinely off guard by the direct confrontation and understanding, with a cold clarity, precisely how much the alliance mattered to his own family's continued influence, found himself answering with a careful, measured reassurance that fell considerably short of the genuine defence Eliza deserved. "The rumours are considerably exaggerated, Lord Pembroke," Damien said. "Miss Sinclair manages her father's shop with genuine competence, and I have consulted her professionally on matters concerning my mother's health. Nothing further. I would ask that you not trouble yourself over gossip, with so little substance behind it." Lord Pembroke studied him for a long moment with the particular, assessing coldness of a man well accustomed to detecting evasion. "See that it remains nothing further, Your Grace," he said. "I have spent 20 years building this alliance, and I do not intend to watch it jeopardized by a tradesman's daughter, however competently she manages a shop." Damien said nothing further in that first conversation, telling himself the matter had been adequately addressed, and it was some days later, at a gathering hosted by Lady Victoria's own family, and attended, by unfortunate coincidence, by Eliza herself, in the company of a family friend, that the matter came to its cruelest possible resolution, Lord Pembroke engineering the encounter quite deliberately to force Damien's public correction of the rumours in front of witnesses whose gossip he could rely upon to travel considerably further than any private denial ever could. "Miss Sinclair," Lord Pembroke said with a cold, deliberate courtesy that made plain the trap he had set. "His Grace has been rather generous with his attention toward your family's shop of late. I confess I find myself curious what precisely he finds so compelling there." Damien, understanding in that single, suspended moment precisely what answer the room required of him to protect the alliance his entire family's influence depended upon, delivered it with a careless, deliberate cruelty. He chose specifically because he believed, in his own cold, practical calculation, that a sharp enough dismissal would end the rumours more thoroughly than any gentler correction could manage. "There is nothing whatsoever special about Miss Sinclair, Lord Pembroke," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room's sudden, attentive silence. "She manages her father's shop competently enough, which is rather more than I can say for most tradespeople in London, but I confess I find the suggestion of anything further between us considerably more amusing than accurate." The silence that followed carried a particular, devastating weight, and Damien, even in the moment of delivering it, understood the cruelty of his own words landing on Eliza with a force he had deliberately, calculatedly chosen to inflict. She said nothing in response beyond a brief, composed excuse to the room at large, and left the gathering within minutes, her own composure carefully maintained despite what Damien recognized, watching her go, as a genuine and considerable wound. Eliza did not call upon Kesteven House again in the weeks that followed, arranging instead for her father's own apprentice to manage any further deliveries required, and Damien, understanding precisely why she had withdrawn so completely, found himself, across those same weeks, unable to shake a growing, uncomfortable awareness that he had genuinely valued her company for reasons that had nothing whatsoever to do with the careless, dismissive words he had used to protect his own political alliance. He caught himself, more than once in those weeks, reaching for some small observation he wished to share with her, a passage in a book he had been reading that he knew would draw exactly her particular brand of dry amusement, before remembering, with a fresh and specific ache, that he had forfeited any right to share it. He attended a dinner at Lord Pembroke's own house not long after, seated beside Lady Victoria, with the same careful, dutiful attention he had always brought to her company, and found himself, partway through the evening, comparing her perfectly correct, perfectly practiced conversation against Eliza's blunt, genuine directness, with a clarity that left him considerably more unsettled than he cared to admit to anyone, least of all himself. He told himself, in the weeks that followed, that the matter was settled, that his duty to his family and to Lord Pembroke's considerable influence outweighed whatever private regret he carried over a single necessary cruelty, and it was this careful, practiced self-deception that governed his existence right up until the moment, some 3 months later, that word reached him of a crisis considerably graver than any wounded feelings his own careless words had caused. Mr. Thomas Sinclair, Eliza's own father, was arrested on a charge of smuggling contraband medicines from the continent, a serious offence that carried, upon conviction, the very real possibility of transportation, or worse, and Damien, hearing the news through his own household's usual channels of gossip, understood almost immediately, with a cold, sinking certainty, that the charge bore all the hallmarks of a deliberate fabrication rather than genuine criminal conduct. Mr. Sinclair had supplied Kesteven House's own medical needs for years, with a scrupulous, careful honesty that Damien had personally witnessed on numerous occasions, and the timing of the arrest, arriving so precisely in the aftermath of the very rumours Lord Pembroke had worked so hard to suppress, struck Damien as considerably too convenient to be genuine coincidence. He began his own quiet investigation within days, calling upon contacts at the customs office who owed him considerable favours from years of careful political cultivation, and discovered, with a mounting and cold fury, precisely what he had suspected from the very first report. The contraband evidence supposedly found in Mr. Sinclair's shop had been planted there by a customs officer whose own gambling debts had, Damien's inquiries revealed, been quietly settled some weeks earlier by a payment traced, through several careful intermediaries, directly back to Lord Pembroke's own household accounts. The investigation itself took the better part of a fortnight, Damien working through the evenings with a discretion he had never once needed to apply to any matter of his own affairs, meeting the customs officer in question, a nervous, clearly compromised man named Mr. Aldous Rigg, in a series of increasingly careful private conversations that gradually revealed the full shape of the conspiracy. Rigg, terrified of the considerable power arrayed against him, should the truth ever emerge from his own testimony, resisted Damien's early attempts at persuasion entirely, and it was only Damien's growing understanding of the man's genuine desperation, buried beneath gambling debts that Lord Pembroke's payment had only partially addressed, that finally offered him the leverage required to secure any cooperation at all. Lord Pembroke, having concluded that Eliza Sinclair remained a genuine threat to the alliance, regardless of Damien's public dismissal of her, had apparently decided that removing her father from London entirely, through a fabricated criminal charge severe enough to devastate the whole family's reputation and circumstances, offered a considerably more permanent solution than mere gossip ever could. Damien confronted the discovery with a fury that surprised even himself, understanding, with a clarity that arrived considerably too late to spare Eliza any of the damage already inflicted, precisely how thoroughly his own careless cruelty at that gathering had failed to protect anyone at all, having instead simply confirmed, in Lord Pembroke's own cold calculation, that Eliza Sinclair posed little enough value to Damien's own reputation, that her family could be destroyed without any genuine political cost. He called upon Eliza directly, for the first time since the terrible gathering, finding her at her father's own shop attempting, with a composure that Damien recognized as costing her considerably more than she allowed herself to show, to manage the family's affairs, while her father awaited trial in conditions Damien understood, from his own inquiries, to be considerably harsher than the charge itself warranted. "I have come to tell you the truth of what has actually happened to your father," Damien said, "and to tell you, plainly, that the words I spoke at Lady Victoria's gathering were a deliberate cruelty I chose specifically to protect an alliance I now understand I valued considerably more than I ought to have, at a cost I am only beginning to fully understand." Eliza regarded him with a composure considerably colder than anything she had shown him across the whole of their earlier acquaintance. "I did not ask you to explain yourself, Your Grace," she said. "I have rather more pressing concerns at present than the reasons behind a sentence I have already spent 3 months learning to live with." "Your father's arrest was engineered by Lord Pembroke," Damien said, "specifically because my own public dismissal of you failed to convince him you posed no genuine threat to the alliance. I have evidence of the bribery involved, evidence I intend to bring before the proper authorities regardless of what it costs my own family's political future, and I have come to ask whether you will permit me to help you clear your father's name, whatever else you decide you owe me in the way of forgiveness." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an expression that carried, beneath its careful composure, a flicker of the same directness that had first drawn Damien to her months earlier. "And what precisely does helping us cost you, Your Grace?" she asked, "given how thoroughly you have already demonstrated, once, exactly how much you are prepared to sacrifice when the alliance is genuinely threatened." "Everything, if it comes to that," Damien said, "and I find I no longer particularly care. I have spent my entire life understanding my own existence as a series of careful obligations owed to my family's influence, and I have finally understood, watching what that obligation was prepared to do to your father in order to protect itself, precisely how little that influence is actually worth if it requires destroying an innocent man to preserve it." What followed, across the weeks leading up to Mr. Sinclair's trial, required Damien to abandon nearly every careful, disciplined habit that had governed his adult existence. He bribed the very customs officer Lord Pembroke had originally corrupted, offering a sum considerably larger than Pembroke's own payment in exchange for a signed confession detailing the full scope of the conspiracy, a transaction that constituted, by any strict legal measure, precisely the sort of corruption of a witness that could have seen Damien himself prosecuted had the full truth ever emerged in less sympathetic circumstances. He broke into the customs office's own evidence room under cover of darkness, with the assistance of a former army acquaintance skilled in exactly such delicate work, a man named Captain Hollis, who had served alongside Damien's own late cousin, and owed the family a debt of loyalty considerable enough to risk his own liberty on the undertaking. The two men worked through a narrow rear window well past midnight, Damien's own hands, more accustomed to the careful management of ledgers than any such physical undertaking, fumbling twice with the lock of the cabinet where the original, unaltered shipping manifests were kept, records that would prove, once genuinely examined, that no such contraband shipment had ever actually reached Mr. Sinclair's shop at all. They retrieved the documents with barely an hour to spare before the night watchman's next round, and Damien rode back to Kesteven House, through the empty streets before dawn, with the stolen evidence pressed against his own chest, beneath his coat, understanding, with a strange and rather bracing clarity, that he had just committed a crime considerably more serious than anything he had ever once imagined himself capable of. He committed, in the trial itself, an act of calculated perjury regarding the precise nature of his own relationship with the customs officer, testifying under oath that he had approached Rig only after the man had already independently decided to confess, protecting the officer's cooperation from Lord Pembroke's considerable retaliatory reach in exchange for testimony that ultimately proved decisive in exonerating Mr. Sinclair entirely, a lie sworn before a magistrate that Damien understood, even as he spoke it, could cost him his own liberty and title should the truth of his bribery ever fully surface. And he broke, in the most public and consequential manner of all, his own engagement to Lady Victoria Pembroke, standing before her own father in the same cold, formal drawing room where he had once delivered his cruel dismissal of Eliza, and informing Lord Pembroke, in front of witnesses considerably more numerous and considerably less easily controlled than his original audience, precisely why the alliance 20 years in the making could not, in good conscience, proceed any further. "I have evidence, Lord Pembroke," Damien said, "of your own hand in fabricating criminal charges against an innocent tradesman, evidence I intend to present before the full weight of whatever authority proves willing to hear it, regardless of what retaliation you believe your own influence entitles you to pursue against my family in return. I am ending this engagement not merely because I find I cannot marry into a family capable of such deliberate cruelty, but because I have finally understood, at considerable and rather overdue cost, precisely what I am actually prepared to sacrifice for the woman your own scheme very nearly destroyed." The scandal that followed rocked London's political circles for months, Lord Pembroke's own considerable influence proving insufficient to fully suppress evidence as thoroughly documented as Damien's careful, if thoroughly illegal, investigation had produced. And though the broken engagement cost Damien's family a measure of political standing that took years to fully rebuild, Mr. Sinclair's name was cleared entirely, and Lord Pembroke himself found his own reputation considerably more damaged by the affair than any single broken betrothal could have managed on its own. Eliza, watching Damien risk considerably more than his own comfort to undo the damage his single careless sentence had caused, found her own carefully guarded anger softening, across the months of the investigation and trial, into something considerably warmer, understanding, with a clarity she had not expected to feel again after that terrible evening, precisely how thoroughly a man's actions might eventually outweigh even his most wounding words, provided the actions proved genuine enough and cost him enough to matter. She had watched, across those months, the toll the whole undertaking took on him, the exhausted circles beneath his eyes after nights spent with Captain Hollis's covert assistance, the careful, guarded tension he carried through the trial itself, never once certain whether his own perjury might be discovered before the verdict was secured, and it was that visible, ongoing cost, considerably more than the eventual triumphant outcome, that finally convinced her his regret had never been a performance at all. "You broke a great many laws on my father's behalf," Eliza observed, some weeks after the trial's conclusion, finding Damien waiting for her once again outside her father's shop, considerably more humbled in his bearing than the confident Duke who had once dismissed her so casually in a crowded drawing room. "I broke a great many laws on your behalf, Miss Sinclair," Damien corrected, "your father's exoneration being simply the necessary means by which I might eventually earn the right to stand in front of you again at all. I understand a single sincere accounting cannot undo what I said that evening. I only hope you might allow me to spend considerably longer proving, in a manner rather more sustained than a single dramatic trial, that the words were never true, and that the man who spoke them has spent every day since trying to become someone worthy of taking them back." Eliza studied him for a long moment, something in her own careful composure, finally genuinely softening. "My father speaks of you constantly now, you understand," she said. "It has become rather difficult to maintain my own guarded distance when he insists on singing your praises over dinner every single evening. I begin to suspect the two of you have conspired against my better judgment entirely." "I would never presume to conspire against your better judgment," Damien said, "though I confess I have not discouraged your father's good opinion nearly so firmly as perhaps I ought to have, given how considerably it has worked in my favor." They were married the following year, in a ceremony considerably smaller and considerably less politically consequential than the grand alliance Damien had once believed his entire existence obligated him to honor, and Damien found, standing at the altar, watching Eliza walk toward him, in a gown her own father had insisted on paying for himself, despite Damien's every attempt at generosity, that he had finally understood the genuine difference between the careful, dutiful obligations he had spent his whole life honoring and the considerably rarer, considerably more valuable thing he had very nearly destroyed in service of them. "Mr. Sinclair," walking his daughter down the aisle, with a pride that had nothing whatsoever to do with the alliance Damien had once believed, the only measure of a marriage's worth, wept openly through the entire ceremony, and Captain Hollis, seated among the small gathering of guests, raised a private, knowing toast to the Duke's considerably improved skill at climbing through locked windows since their first shared night of criminal enterprise. If watching a proud man break every rule he had ever lived by to undo a single careless cruelty left you satisfied, you know exactly what to do. This channel is brand new, and every subscriber genuinely helps us keep telling stories like this one, so if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss the next release. Give this one a like if you think Eliza was right to make him earn it back through more than words alone. Share it with someone who loves a story about a man finally choosing what actually matters, and let me know in the comments whether you'd have forgiven him as thoroughly as she did.